performance has improved hugely. Like we did 525 last year. Back in 2015, we would have been kind of 430, 440 thereabouts. So, there's almost 80 kilos of solids added on. Breeding is probably the big one. Definitely through the percentages, improving your fat and protein percentages, and grassland management would be the other real big one.
Irish dairy farms are making huge progress when it comes to improving their sustainability metrics. The Teagasc FBD Environmental Sustainability Awards aims to highlight farms which are leaders in this regard. I'm joined by dairy farmer Brendan Walsh, who was the overall winner in 2024. Brendan outlines how he farms to meet high levels of performance while keeping the long-term sustainability of his system in mind. So thanks for joining us, Brendan.
Thanks, James. Thanks for having me on.
Give us a little bit of a background to yourself firstly, and then maybe to the farm.
I suppose I started off when I finished school. I went to college in UCD in Dublin and studied dairy business. So that was all the way back in 2011. And then from there, I was working with Glanbia then for about 6 years. So I was living at home, milking in the morning, milking in the weekends, and then working with Glanbia during the day. And then in 2021, I came home full time then.
Who's involved in the running of the farming business?
To be myself and Dad full time, and we've a local workman, Andrew, as well. He'd be Monday to Friday, and then Mum and I suppose my two sisters would give a hand, especially in the spring when things will come under pressure. But to be three of us full time.
Very good. Where he is farming, I know it's Tipperary, it's strong hurling country, I'm right in saying.
Yeah.
We need to be careful maybe about mentioning that at the minute, but we're
going well.
situated.
We're just south of Cahir, so in South Tipperary would be close enough to the kind of the Waterford border.
Brendan, can you tell us a little bit about your farming system and maybe outline 2024 farm performance?
Yeah, so we're a spring calving dairy herd. We rear all our replacements, so the calves and the heifers, and we'd also rear about 40 beef calves, and we'd finish maybe 25 to 30 of those in the second winter. Overall, we're stocked at 2.3 whole farm, and in and around maybe 2.6, 2.7 on the milking platform. This year we're milking 167 cows. They did 524 kilos of solids in 2024 at, I think it was 4.68 fat and 3.72 protein. And that was off 1.25 ton of, was made up of nuts and soya hulls. Now that's up a lot. That's probably the highest we've ever fed. Usually would be around 800 kilos.
What was driving that? Obviously, the spring of 2024 was very, very difficult. Was it a need for silage or forage, or what kind of was driving that increase in concentrate usage?
Well, I wouldn't just say it was the spring. It was practically all of 2024, to be honest, James. Here, it was really only the last rotation that things were normal. So the spring was February, March, April, May were wet, poor utilisation of grass. June was cold, so poor growth. July and August were dry, not overly warm, but warm, and lacking rainfall. And it was only really towards the middle of September that things turned around. So you could say you're almost a full season of underperformance. So that's why concentrate usage would have been higher.
And were you back much in terms of overall grass grown last year, Brendan, compared to tonnage-wise, compared to where you would have been in previous years?
In the finish, we weren't actually back at all. We were on average. It was just that how well, I suppose, September, October, November, December, that was what brought it back to average up to that. Growth in the spring wasn't bad, but it was the summer that really made a mess of it, to be honest. But the end of the year kind of, I suppose, put a nice tinge on it, and brought it back to our average.
Yeah, and where is that average at? What kind of tonnage would you be growing on the platform?
Just shy of 13.5 would be the average.
And in terms of actual nitrogen inputs there, and we might get into it a little bit later on, but what sort of nitrogen inputs to achieve that sort of growth rate?
Yeah, last year I think we were now this is whole farm. We would have been 130. I think it was 133 kilos per hectare. Um, the year before in 2023 would have been our lowest at 115. So I suppose it would have gone from probably in 2020 in around 220 down to gradually down to 115 in 2023, and then up slightly to 133 in 2024.
Farm development, we'll say over the years or since quotas went, in terms of has it grown in scale? How has that performance improved? I suppose just give our listeners a bit of a view how that has happened, we'll say, over the last 6, 7, 8 years.
Yeah, I suppose you're no different to any other dairy farm. 2015 and quotas going was probably the big change over the years. I suppose like since then we've doubled, actually slightly over doubled cow numbers. Performance has improved hugely. Like we did 525 last year. Back in 2015 we would have been kind of 430, 440 thereabouts. So there's almost, I suppose, 80 kilos of solids added on in that period.
What are you putting that down to, Brendan? I know it's probably a combination effect, but is there a few things that you could point to?
Well, I suppose, look, breeding is probably the big one. Definitely through the percentages, improving your fat and protein percentages, and management, grassland management, would be the other real big one. Probably in those early stages, I wouldn't have measured grass before 2014, I think. So like from doing that, you could see quite rapidly the improvement that you were getting through proper management and proper pre-grazings and rotation lint and all that kind of stuff.
It's the things sometimes I think at farm level we often take those the simple things for granted, but they're the things that deliver those real gains over time, aren't they?
Yeah, we definitely do take it for granted because I suppose it's not new anymore. It's something that's been there a long time, and we've been doing it a long time. So we kind of, again, second nature, take it for granted. But it's definitely one of the top 3 most important things to be good at on a dairy farm or any farm, really.
And herd performance at the moment, how are they doing? Coming out of a kind of a warm, dry spell.
Yeah, so like production had been I suppose very good up to mid-May, and then just the quality in the grass because of how dry it was, just I suppose deteriorated really quick, and production dropped quickly. So I think we went down to about 2.05 kilos of solids. We peaked at 2.4 in mid-April. Now production has improved. It's improved in the last week. I think we're back to 2.15 or thereabouts. So if we can kind of hold that, look, we're like the weather has come favourable now for correcting paddocks and correcting quality. So we'll be hoping that into the next rotation, into the next round, that there'll be better quality in front of them. We'll be able to maintain that kind of production for a little bit longer.
That's really the job of work now, I suppose, across a lot of farms is to try and get that quality, get back into the right pre-grazings, but also ensuring it's good quality, as you say. In terms of that whole farm stocking rate, stocked at 2.3 whole farm, was that always the case, or have you found that that's the sweet spot for your farm?
We would have been maybe, well, I suppose back in kind of quota time, we would have been a little bit lower than that. That's probably the in and around where we've been for the last 4 or 5 years, and that overall stocking rate of 2.3 is I would think the sweet spot where you can I suppose you can make enough silage for what you require. You can ride out poor growing periods, whether that's a cold spring or what we tend to get more of here would be warm, dry, droughty summer. So to kind of ride out those periods, overall 2.3 is nearly the the sweet spot we've found.
Yeah, that's on good levels of pasture performance. Um, to come to, I mentioned it at the outset, you were the overall Teagasc FBD Environmental Sustainability Award winner. But what we've heard so far is you're running a very, very high performing farm. Um, Sustainability, and I suppose what does that mean to Brendan Walsh when we talk about that term?
Um, well, I think probably the overriding thing or the overriding element of sustainability that maybe sometimes is kind of forgotten about a little bit is actually profit and the ability to generate good profit, a good profitable business. That's the first port of call. Because if that isn't happening, all the other elements can't happen. Um, so I suppose that's the starting point. You need to be profitable and have the ability to generate, I suppose, cash that you can reinvest, but also a good living. Um, and then from there, then you have I suppose the environmental side of it and the production side of it. I suppose they go hand in hand. So kind of anything that we do, um, it has to, I suppose, if possible, improve productivity. So like if we're reducing any input, if it can improve productivity, great. Now most of them don't, um, but also it can't impact on profit. So anything that we've done or implemented, it I suppose it complements the farm or the business, more so than taking from it, while also
Yeah.
then doing the environmental bit. So reducing your carbon footprint, reducing impact on water quality, and then I suppose improving biodiversity and hedgerows and that kind of space as well.
And a lot of farms have been on that journey, and yous are obviously on that journey, and I think that's maybe the single most important point. It fits with the run of your business. A lot of those practices, which we're going to speak about now, will add to the bottom line.
Yeah.
Or as you said, if it's about reducing costs or inputs that they don't actually take from the bottom line,
Mm.
which is important. What changes, I suppose, have you made over the years, and nearly, if we work our way through them in terms of which you think were the big ones, or the ones that took the most effort and have yielded maybe the best performance, that have improved the overall farming system, but obviously improved that kind of environmental sustainability side of things.
Selective dry cow therapy was probably the very first one that we ever tried and touched off. So we did that. We started that back in 2016. Slowly, I don't know, we do maybe 10 cows then, and we've built it up to about 70%, give or take. Yeah, 70% the last couple of years would be getting no antibiotic at dry off. Um, and it kind of like now, because I suppose we're almost 10 years doing it, it seems like it's second nature to us now. We wouldn't be anyway nervous about it, but at the start we obviously were, and we would have started small, built up the confidence, and built up the records as well.
What have you kind of learned along the way, and what did you put in place to ensure that it was a success at farm level? You're up at 70% of animals now getting sealer only, which is the vast majority of the herd. So, what are your protocols with that regard?
Yeah, so the main one was probably the criteria to get into whether you're selective or not, and the first one would be no case of mastitis during the year. Um, then on the cell count, it would be an average cell count of below 80 and below 80 on the last milk recording. That one is probably the most important one, really, that you're below 80 on the last milk recording, because that indicates whether there's any potential infection, recent infection or not. And then I suppose it kind of comes down to technique, and the amount you do. You know, if you're doing a large amount in the one go, it's hard to keep the standards up the whole way through. What we'd also do now, this doesn't work out every year, weather depending, but if possible, we would send the cows that have just been dried off out to the outblock. So they might spend a week outside, Now, look, that doesn't happen every year, so they might have to go straight to cubicles, and if they do, we'd be liming twice a day until they're soaked up, and that there's no risk of, I suppose, picking up anything in those initial couple of days after being dried off.
Really. So you're very clear around your criteria as to whether what cows are suitable, and then in terms of the whole hygiene piece around drying off and the environment afterwards, as you say.
Yeah.
The other one, high levels of herd performance there, and you mentioned it earlier in terms of the breeding and the impact breeding has had on that. Just where are you at with herd EBI? Are you using sex semen? Are you using high DBI beef bulls? Where are you at with that space?
Yeah, so I suppose like it would always have been, even since my grandfather's time, it would have been AI used here to generate the replacements. So I think our EBI at the minute is 262, or in around that. And I suppose you mentioned there the sex semen. I suppose sex semen in genomics has kind of accelerated the the genetic potential, if you like, that we're getting from the heifers, because we're able to select the real top end of the cows to breed off of. And because of the sex, you obviously don't need as many straws to get the same amount of heifers. So that's really, I suppose, driven on the quality of the heifer that we're getting as replacements. And maybe over the last couple of years, we've been focusing a lot on. Originally, it would have been fertility. We don't really pick bulls on fertility anymore. It kind of goes hand in hand with the other traits that we're picking. So like we'd focus a lot on fat and protein percent. So we're kind of aiming for plus 0.3 on fat and plus 0.25 on protein, kind of for the bull team, and in and around plus 30 kilos of solids. So you can get that 30 kilos of solids without having a positive milk kilos. So I think our bull team is a negative.
That doesn't annoy you or worry you or
No. It like the 30 kilos is the big thing. If you can generate that and more without without milk volume, it doesn't really matter. And it's actually more, there's better value in that too. So like our herd, I think, is a minus. It's a slight minus for milk kilos, but we'll do in around 6,100, 6,200, maybe 5,900, depending on the year. So like,
yeah,
you don't need that volume to get volume.
You went from 220 kilos of chemical N inputs back to 133, I think you said last year, 115 the year before. How has that happened? You're still growing 13.5 ton of grass, which is underpinning the system. So it didn't happen overnight anyway, is what you're going to tell me, but how has that happened?
Yeah, no, it didn't. So in I can't remember, was it 2020 or 2021? We joined the low carbon dairy group. So that's I suppose it's basically a Clover group based out of Salahead originally, and that kind of got us on the Clover. I suppose managing Clover properly. We always had it in the reseeds, but we never really did that with it. If it was there, great. If it wasn't, it didn't make any difference. And I suppose we didn't really know fully how to manage it either to get the full nitrogen benefit out of it. So we started with that in 21. Kind of I suppose the big point coming from that was, that we took anyway, was zero nitrogen, and seeing the productivity of the zero nitrogen swards up in Salahead gave us, I suppose, the confidence. Now it still was hard, and it's still it's a hard thing to get your mind used to, but that gave us the confidence then to try zero chemical nitrogen on good quality clover swards. And I suppose through reseeding.
How do you base that decision, Brendan? Before, and I might come to the establishment, but how do you base? You're obviously basing. You're making a call on a paddock by paddock basis. what influences that decision in terms of whether it gets zero nitrogen mid-season or whether it gets applications, or how do you make that call?
Yeah, so like we don't work off of Clover content because you know, my 20% could be your 35%. You know, it's very hard to actually say what Clover content is. So we kind of go on distribution. So if you walk across a field and if there's clover in every step you take, there's enough clover in the field for zero chemical nitrogen. That's the way we work it.
And what percentage of the farm would actually have clover in it? And then what percentage of the farm, or platform, I should say, we'll say your 0N paddocks there that you mentioned?
I think there's 40% or 0N, and there's maybe, I think it's around maybe slightly over 50% has clover.
Okay.
So the kind of the 10 or 15% on top of the 40, they would be getting nitrogen at the minute. And we'll see. We've stopped it on one in the last round. We'll see. There is another one that probably is good enough that we might stop it eventually too if the weather stays favourable. You know, if we're getting consistent rain, we might stop that one too. But that's probably where it'll be. It'll be probably no more than 50% for the rest of the season.
Okay, yeah. And you're obviously monitoring that then on a weekly basis in terms of watching the growth rates of those paddocks and how they're actually performing.
Yeah, but look, there's no different. There's no different to the grass paddocks. To be honest, you know, they're measured in the walk. Like in the annual tonnage now, we've clover paddocks that are getting zero at the top, at the middle, and at the bottom, same as a grass paddock. So it's no different.
On the establishment side of things, which is, I suppose, is the first challenge at farm level, is how have you established clover on the farm? Is there a number of different things you've tried? And I suppose what's working best for your farm?
Yeah, so we've tried oversowing, doing it a couple of different ways, and reseeding, obviously. And I suppose the one consistent is that reseeding always works. Oversowing has only worked once. To be honest, we've kind of decided that oversowing isn't really worth the effort. We're all of our establishing is through reseeding now, and if for whatever reason, so like kind of 2020, the autumn of 23 and the spring of 24, clover contents would have dropped back. We've decided now that we're not going to oversow paddocks to, you know, try and get them back. We're just going to keep our clover, I suppose, our clover percentages on the farm up through the 10% reseeding every year, because you're guaranteed that will work. You're not guaranteed oversowing will work. And to be honest, I don't think it's worth the effort, because it's not just there's a lot of work after the oversowing event that you need to do to get it to I suppose to be a zero nitrogen clover paddock. And we feel that work and the lack of, or I suppose the drop in tonnage that you're going to get isn't really worth the effort versus the reseeding.
Just managing bloat. What do you do to manage bloat in those risk periods?
Yeah, so that's obviously one or the big negative to clover. And it's not something that's nice to experience. We've lost one cow with bloat, and we've had a couple of instances of cows bloated up at different times, and so it's kind of been a learn as you go, unfortunately, and it is different for every farm. But the things that we do are kind of our two main ports of call would be the breakfast break or the 2-hour break. So the cows go out row by row after milking. They get a small allocation in a clover paddock, and that means they have to graze down the clover and the grass and I suppose the stem. And then after milking, they will take up the wire. But the other one that I would say is probably more important is we would offer the cows straw at milking time. So we're lucky that our collecting yards and our exit yards are our feeding barrier in the wintertime. So all the cows can actually get, or they can eat straw during milking. So we're not holding them up. They have the option to eat it. They don't have to eat it. Some days they'll eat a lot, some days they won't eat any. So they're kind of self-regulating when they know that they need fibre. And the other thing that we'll do, and we did it the other day, if the conditions aren't right, we'll just skip the paddock. We'll go on to a grass paddock. So like, it had been a dry day, and then around 3 o'clock in the evening, it just started raining, and it was raining heavy. So they were due to go into that clover paddock then that night, but they were kind of the perfect conditions for bloat. So we just skipped it. So we skipped that paddock for a day and a half, and then came back to it. So I that's why I wouldn't like. It's always important to have a couple of grass paddocks that you can go to on the days that the conditions don't really, that you haven't the wire set up ready to go. Just go to the grass paddock. You can always go back to the clover paddock when the conditions are better. And then the other one then is bloat oil. We don't put bloat oil in the water, but we do have it on hand in case we need to treat a cow. So we use it more for treatment than prevention.
And offering that fibre really is in those risk periods, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's at those periods in the year where it's a risk. It's not that you have to offer fibre every day of the year, Brendan.
Yeah. So like today now would be the kind of the weather we've gotten recently would actually be a risky enough period, because we've come from a dry period of high, grass was high dry matter. We've gotten the rain, dry matter has dropped, and growths have increased. And if you have the clover content then as well, that's a kind of a perfect storm for bloat. So now would be the time that we would be, we'd destroy, and we'll be putting up the wire as well. And then you just kind of base it. Obviously as the year goes on, it's a little bit more risky as the content increases, but there can be a risk early in the year with the conditions we have now, or there could also be no risk later in the year if it was really dry again.
Of the nitrogen that's gone on, in what form, and I suppose how has that changed over time?
Yeah, so all our straight nitrogen would be either 46% protected urea or 38 plus 7.6% sulfur. They both be protected, and we've been using protected urea again nearly 10 years. We would always have been kind of big fans of urea, straight urea before protected urea, and we would, like, when the conditions were right for straight urea, be it spring, summer, we would use straight urea. So like, we I suppose we were used to urea, so we'd no problem with protected urea, except for last year, where I suppose the product quality wasn't really up to scratch, it seemed. But look, we've used it in the past, so we were confident in it. But we were disappointed with the product quality last year.
And was that a spreadability? Was that a spreading issue, Brendan, or how did that?
Yeah, it was a spreading issue. Like you could see stripes and patches, and it'd be fairly obvious. And it wasn't, nothing really changed other than, I suppose, that. And like it wasn't, we had the confidence that we'd used it before, that we knew it worked. So it was, I suppose, look, it was a frustration, and especially the year that it probably did a lot of unnecessary damage to the usage of protected urea.
Which just picking up on your point there, you're using it a long time. You obviously have got to performance with the product, still growing lots of grass. As you say, maybe the two things were confused in terms of, is it a spreadability issue, or is the product actually working? And you outlined it's working. It's just some of those issues around spreading and striping and different things. You haven't seen those this year?
No, it's all fine this year.
You are having a farm open day connected with obviously winning that award. Just when is that? And obviously our listeners we've only really touched on things, but they'll get to see a lot more of the workings of the farm.
Yeah, so it's a tiny little bit different to the usual farm walk. It's starting at 6:30 in the evening on Tuesday, the 10th of June. And I suppose you'll be able to see all the kind of the things we were talking about there, from biodiversity and hedgerows, the cows, clover, and water quality. They're kind of the four main topics and stands.
Very good. And if anybody wants to get any more details on that, if you visit the Teagasc website and the events tab under that, you'll be fit to get more detail on that and the location details. So look, that's it for this week's episode of the Dairy Edge podcast. My thanks to Brendan Walsh for joining me on this week's show. Don't forget to rate, review and subscribe to the podcast. You can listen on Apple, Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And for more information, go to the Teagasc website at teagasc.ie. I'm James Dunne and join us next time for your Dairy Edge.